Hello, hello, hello. Namaste, my witchlings. Welcome one and all to the Yoga Witch's Cauldron. This is a space for slow wisdom, for integration, and for practices that don't burn us out in the name of growth or goodness. Whether you are returning to the Cauldron or joining us here for the very first time, I'm so glad you are here. Hey, hi, hello, and welcome. I am Di, your Yoga Witch and host. Tonight, we are talking about tending the flame daily, not igniting, not escalating, and definitely not transforming everything all at once, just tending. Because a fire that is never tended eventually burns itself out, and a practice that requires constant effort, well, eventually collapses. So if you're listening while resting, walking, doing laundry, or simply sitting quietly, you are exactly where you need to be. Take one easy breath, let your shoulders soften. We are so not in a rush tonight. Okay. Many of us were taught explicitly or quietly that devotion looks like effort, that the depth of our care can be measured by how much we do, how often we show up, and how intense we are willing to be. We learn early that sincerity is proven through output. More time, more consistency, more intensity, more discipline. I have never agreed with the more discipline. Anyway. And then when exhaustion sets in, and it inevitably does, the solution offered is almost never rest or redesign. Instead, we're told to recommit, to refocus, to push through, to tighten our grip and try harder, as though fatigue were a moral failing rather than a biological and emotional signal. This logic shows up literally everywhere in spiritual spaces that practice daily rituals without acknowledging fluctuating capacity. In wellness culture that treats burnout as a mindset problem. In productivity systems that assume everyone has equal energy, stable schedules, and uninterrupted lives. Even in activist and community spaces where devotion is sometimes measured by how much you're willing to sacrifice sleep, health, boundaries, joy for your cause. But here is a truth that almost never gets spoken aloud. Most people don't stop practicing because they don't care. They stop because the practice asked for more than they could sustainably give. And that distinction matters deeply. When someone falls off their meditation practice, their yoga mat gathers dust, their altar goes untouched, or their journal stays closed for weeks, it is super easy to internalize the failure. Goddess knows I do. We tell ourselves we're lazy, we're uncommitted, inconsistent, or undisciplined. We assume something is wrong with us. But what if nothing is wrong with you? What if the issue isn't your devotion, but the design of the practice itself? I mean, think about it. If a practice only works when you're well rested, motivated, emotionally regulated, and uninterrupted, then it really isn't designed for real life. Real life includes grief, illness, caregiving, work stress, neurodivergence, trauma responses, financial pressure, and the simple unpredictability of being human. A practice that collapses the moment life gets complicated isn't sacred, is brittle. And brittle things break. We live in bodies that change day to day. Some mornings you wake up grounded and clear. Other days your nervous system is already braced before your feet even hit the floor and your head comes off the pillow. Some seasons offer spaciousness. Others demand survival level triage. A sustainable practice must must be able to meet you in all of those states, not just the aspirational ones. Yet, so many systems of devotion are built around an idealized practitioner, someone with time, privacy, physical ability, emotional bandwidth, and internal quiet. When you don't match that image, the unspoken message becomes try harder or fall away. That message quietly erodes trust, because each time you push yourself past your capacity in the name of devotion, your body learns something very important. This practice is not safe when I am struggling. Over time, your nervous system begins to associate the practice with pressure instead of refuge. What once felt nourishing starts to feel like yet another obligation. Another place where you can fail. And that doesn't feel good. That's not going to motivate you to keep going. So eventually, you just stop showing up. Not because you stopped caring, but because your system is protecting you. This is where the idea of doing more truly collapses. You cannot effort your way into sustainability. You cannot discipline yourself into safety. You cannot force consistency out of a body that is begging to be listened to. Trying harder might get you through a short burst. It might. It also might look impressive from the outside. But trust me, it doesn't build anything that lasts. It builds resentment, exhaustion, and a quiet sense of I can talk, really I can. It builds resentment, exhaustion, and a sense of inadequacy that seeps into every corner of your practice. And then, oftentimes without realizing it, you don't just step away from the ritual. You step away from yourself. And that right there is the real cost of practices that demand constant output. They teach us to override our own signals in the name of devotion. They train us to value performance over presence. And eventually, they make devotion feel like something we have to earn instead of something we return to. So let's talk about this really clearly. If a practice requires you to be at your best in order to be worthy of it, then it is not a practice of care. If it only honors you when you are consistent, productive, or serene, then it does not honor your humanity. If it cannot bend when life tightens its grip, you will eventually break, or you're gonna walk away to survive. And walking away is not failure. It is, once again, information. It's your body telling you this is too much as it is currently shaped. It's your nervous system asking for a different doorway in. It's wisdom, not weakness. The invitation here is not to abandon devotion, but to reimagine it. To ask better questions than how can I do more? We want questions like, what can I return to on my hardest days? What still feels possible when everything else is stripped away? What kind of practice would meet me with kindness instead of demand? Because devotion that lasts is not built on intensity, it is built on relationship. And relationships don't survive on pressure. They survive on responsiveness, flexibility, and care. All right, we're going to slow this down and really look at the difference between discipline and devotion, because these two very often get tangled together nearly constantly, and when they're confused, people get hurt. Discipline asks, can you push through? Devotion asks, can you return? At first glance, Discipline looks virtuous. It's clean, it's measurable, it gives gold stars and streak counts and a sense of control, right? Discipline loves rules. Do this every day for this long in this way. It rewards consistency and quietly shames deviation. Discipline says if you cared enough, you'd make it happen. Devotion doesn't speak that language. Devotion is relational. It isn't obsessed and concerned with streaks or perfect attendance. It doesn't tally how many times you showed up correctly. Devotion cares about connection, about whether the relationship between you and the practice remains alive. Discipline keeps score. Devotion keeps relationship. This matters because scorekeeping changes how we experience ourselves. When discipline is the dominant force, missing a day isn't neutral. It's a mark against you. Miss enough days, and the practice begins to feel contaminated by that shame. Coming back feels awkward, embarrassing, or even pointless. You tell yourself you've already failed, so why bother? If you've ever stopped a practice because you missed too many days and felt ashamed to return, that wasn't devotion at work. That was control. Control dressed up as commitment. Control pretending to care. Discipline often punishes inconsistency, but devotion allows fluctuation. And fluctuation, my loves, is not a flaw. It's a feature of being alive. Bodies fluctuate. Energy fluctuates. Capacity fluctuates. And attention sure as hell fluctuates, especially if you're ADHD. There are days when a full practice feels nourishing, and there are days when brushing your teeth feels like an accomplishment. A devotion-based practice understands this. It adapts, it softens, it changes shape without breaking that bond. Discipline, on the other hand, tends to override these realities. It encourages you to ignore signals of fatigue, grief, and overwhelm in favor of completion. Now, over time, this creates a quiet but powerful message inside your body. My needs are an obstacle to devotion. And that, my friends, my loves, my witchlings, that is where harm begins. Because devotion does not require you to override your humanity to prove your sincerity. It doesn't ask you to abandon yourself at the altar of consistency. It sure as hell doesn't demand pain as proof of love. It asks something much simpler and much harder. Can you show up? Can you keep showing up without hurting yourself? And that question alone changes everything. Showing up might mean a full ritual today and a single breath tomorrow. It might mean just sitting on the mat, not moving, and letting that be enough. It might mean lighting a candle and saying, I'm here, but I am so tired. And it might even mean consciously choosing rest and trusting that rest does not sever the relationship. Devotion understands that absence is not abandonment. Discipline typically treats it as a betrayal. And this is especially important for people who live in bodies and lives shaped by trauma, disability, neurodivergent, chronic illness, caregiving, or systemic stress. For many of us, rigid discipline isn't just unsustainable, it is actively destabilizing. It mirrors control systems we've already survived. Devotion offers an alternative. Devotion says you don't have to be perfect to belong here. It says you don't lose access because you struggled. Devotion says the door is still open even if you crawl back through it. And yes, devotion still involves commitment. But commitment doesn't have to mean rigidity. It can mean honesty. It can mean listening. It can mean choosing practices that respond to your life instead of competing with it. There is a quiet strength in returning gently, in letting go of the all or nothing mindset that says, if I can't do it right, I won't do it at all. Devotion invites you into the middle space, the imperfect, inconsistent, deeply, deeply human place where real relationship lives. This is where trust is built. When your body learns that it won't be punished for fluctuation, it becomes more willing to engage. When your nervous system knows it can approach without being overwhelmed, it stops bracing. And when shame is removed from the equation entirely, curiosity returns. Devotion doesn't say never stop. No. It says when you stop, you can come back again and again without apology. That's the difference. Discipline seeks mastery. Devotion seeks intimacy. Discipline asks how much you can endure. Devotion asks what you can sustain. And in the long arc of life, especially a life that includes grief, change, and recovery, sustainability is not a lesser goal. It is the most radical one there is, because a practice that stays with you through change is infinitely more powerful than one that only thrives in ideal conditions. Devotion isn't louder than discipline. It's quieter, softer, and far more enduring. It doesn't demand that you prove yourself. It simply asks you to keep the relationship alive with honesty and care and without harm. If you're enjoying this podcast and you would like to maybe step a little deeper into our coven, consider clicking on that join button and becoming a member of this channel. There are some amazing perks for all of my witchlings, and levels start at just $1 a month. How inexpensive is that, my friends? Also, just a quick little reminder that you can help this channel for free by subscribing and sharing this video with a friend. Ring the bell so you know when we're live and posting again. I appreciate all of your support, my witchlings. Thank you guys so very much for tuning in. All right, let's get back to the show. All right. Now, do it. Well, hello. Hello, Michelle. And Ariana. I love that name. Yes, I'm familiar with Has Been. All right. Awesome. Yep, I saw Will come into the members only. Hello, everybody. Oh, and we have a Hazel, too. All right. Uh-oh, John's fighting insomnia. It's going to be an interesting night. Hey, you. I haven't watched much of it. What I have seen, I do like. All right. Moving on. Back to the show here. I'll check in with the chat again later. All right, witchlings. In earlier weeks, we have talked about HearthFire, the energy of ignition, the spark that wakes you up, the heat of truth-telling, and the courage it takes to reclaim agency, name what isn't working, and then choose yourself again. HearthFire is absolutely necessary. It's powerful, and it's often the moment when everything changes for you. But ignition is not the same thing as sustainability. This week, that fire shifts from HearthFire to HearthFire. fire. A hearth fire doesn't roar, it doesn't demand attention, and it doesn't burn everything down to prove it's real. It warms. It sticks around. A hearth fire is built to last through the night. It's tended, not chased. It's designed around continuity rather than spectacle. You don't gather around it to be impressed. You gather around it to live and stay warm. HearthFire is what remains after the breakthrough. It's what carries you once that adrenaline rush fades. And it is the devotion that asks, how do I stay in a relationship with myself over time? HearthFire is the kind of devotion that survives exhaustion, not by pretending... Gotta let the mouth catch up to the brain. It doesn't survive exhaustion by pretending exhaustion isn't there, but it survives by making room for it. A HearthFire practice does not require you to be energized to be worthy of showing up. It doesn't shame you for being tired. It truly understands that fatigue is a part of the human cycle, not a failure to overcome. It adapts to changing capacity. Some days you have range. Other days you have scraps. HearthFire does not insist that both days look the same. It doesn't punish you for fluctuation. It adjusts the size of the offering to match what's actually available. It welcomes rest as part of the rhythm. Rest is not a pause from practice. It is practice. A HearthFire path understands that tending the fire sometimes means letting it burn low. It means trusting embers. And it means knowing that stillness is not absence and quiet is not neglect. And most importantly, HearthFire doesn't collapse when life gets hard, because life will get hard. There will be grief. There will be illness. There will be overwhelm, rage, numbness, caretaking, and seasons where everything you have goes towards survival. A HearthFire practice is built with those seasons in mind. It doesn't demand that you perform devotion while you're bleeding. It stays with you. HearthFire practices are often small. They don't look impressive. They don't photograph well. And they don't make good productivity metrics. But that's okay. They might look like one conscious breath before sleep. Like touching the floor with your hands when you wake up. Like lighting a candle and saying nothing at all. Placing a hand on your chest and checking in, not to fix, just to notice. They might be 5 minutes instead of 60, or one word instead of a whole page in your journal. Maybe even choosing not to abandon yourself in a hard moment. From the outside, these practices can look insignificant, but they last. And longevity is a form of wisdom. We live in a culture that glorifies intensity and visibility, loud devotion, big gestures, all or nothing commitments. HearthFire resists that. It asks a much quieter question. What can you keep returning to for years? Not weeks, not just during a good season, but for years. A HearthFire practice prioritizes return over performance. It's not interested in how deep you go once. It's interested in whether you come back again and again, gently, honestly. This kind of devotion builds trust. Your body learns that it will not be punished for needing less. Your nervous system learns that practice is a place of safety instead of demand. And your inner voice, well, that stops bracing for disappointment and starts opening up again. HearthFire does not ask you to prove your worth. It assumes your worth and builds from there. And here is a quiet truth that a lot of people miss. Sustainable devotion is not less powerful than intense devotion. It's actually more powerful because it changes how you live. When practice becomes something you can carry through ordinary days, through dishes and emails and fatigue and grief and diaper blowouts, it stops being a separate activity. It becomes woven into your life. It becomes how you listen, how you pause, and how you choose not to harden. HearthFire doesn't consume you, it feeds you. It creates a place inside you where you can rest without disappearing, where your agency stays intact even when your energy is low, where devotion feels like companionship instead of pressure. This is the fire that keeps people practicing for decades, not because they're exceptional, but because their practice is humane. So, if you are reimagining your path, let this here be your anchor. You do not need a practice that demands everything from you. You need one that stays when you can't give much at all. That, my darlings, my witchlings, is HearthFire. Not the blaze that impresses, the warmth that endures, and the devotion that lasts. Logic tracks, right? Now let's talk about some small rituals that survive real life. If a ritual only works on your best days, that ain't sustainable. That's not a judgment, y'all. It's a reality check. Been there, done that. Got a few t-shirts to prove it. Real life is not a steady rhythm of well-rested mornings and uninterrupted evenings. Real life includes illness that arrives without warning, grief that drains the color from the world, caregiving that pulls your attention in literally every direction but straight, burnout that flattens motivation, schedules that leave zero white space, and those days when your energy barely clears the minimum required to get through the day. HearthFire rituals are built with those days in mind. They're small enough to survive illness when your body needs care more than effort, small enough to survive grief when words and meaning feel so far away, small enough to survive caregiving when your needs come last, whether you like it or not, small enough to survive burnout even when things you love feel unbearably heavy, small enough to survive busy schedules when time fractures into teeny tiny pieces, and small enough to survive low energy when showing up looks very different than you planned. These rituals don't require special conditions. They don't demand silence, equipment, perfect posture, or emotional clarity. They fit into the cracks of daily life, which is exactly why they last. A HearthFire ritual might be as simple as lighting a candle while making your morning coffee, not as a formal ceremony, but simply as a moment of presence. A reminder that warmth can exist alongside obligation. The kettle boils, the candle flickers, and for just a few seconds, you are here. It might be as simple as one single conscious breath before responding to a message. Just one. Not to calm yourself perfectly or to say the right thing, simply to interrupt the reflex to abandon your body in the moment. That breath is a boundary. It's a choice to stay present. It could be something as small as stretching for 30 seconds. Not a full practice, not a full routine, just a reach and release. Enough to remind your muscles that they belong to you. Enough to soften the edge of tension without asking for more than you can give. It could be as simple as stepping outside for some fresh air. feeling the temperature of the air on your skin, letting your eyes rest on something living. It's not escape, it's regulation. A brief return to the wider world when everything else feels so close. Really, really close. It could be choosing to stop for the day without justification. No productivity spin, no explanation, no promise to make up for it later. Just the quiet decision that you have done enough because you're tired, and being tired is reason enough. These acts don't look powerful. They don't generate impressive stories, and they really don't translate well into highlight reels, and they're not going to earn praise in systems that value output over care. But they are powerful because each one says, I am allowed to remain in relationship with myself without self-sacrifice. That's what makes them devotional. HearthFire rituals don't ask you to trade your well-being for meaning. They don't require pain as proof of sincerity. They honor the truth that a practice which costs your health, safety, or your sense of self is not sacred, it's extractive. Small rituals also retrain trust. When you repeatedly meet yourself with doing something doable instead of something demanding, your body begins to relax around practice. Your nervous system stops bracing for failure, and returning doesn't feel like confession or repair. It feels natural. This is how devotion becomes steady instead of fragile. Small rituals accumulate quietly. One breath doesn't change your life. One stretch isn't going to solve burnout. One candle doesn't heal grief. But over time, these moments create continuity. They become threads that hold you to yourself across weeks and months when everything else in your life is shifting. And there is dignity in that kind of devotion. Because choosing care when no one is watching, when there's no applause and no visible achievement, is an act of integrity. It says you are worthy of gentleness even when you're not producing, fixing, or improving. HearthFire rituals are not about doing less because you don't care. They are about doing what actually allows you to keep caring. So, if your life is loud, heavy, or uncertain, let your rituals be simple. Let them be portable. Let them fit inside the days you actually have, not the days you imagine you should have. Devotion that survives real life is quiet and unremarkable, and it is extraordinarily resilient. Not because it asks more of you, but because it asks so little and stays anyway. We're going to talk about my favorite part in the next section, but let's check in with chat right quick. All right. Coolio. I see a Hazel now. Hey, Pratham. Good to see you. Oh, yep. My fingers are cold. Hey, Will. Thanks. The next segment is going to be particularly poignant for those of us who are chronically ill. Trust me. I love watching the mouse pointer. What are we looking at? What do we need to look at? Okay, we've done it all. All right, y'all. Thank you, John. Oh, you're gonna enjoy the next part too, John. All right. Back to what we're talking about here. All right. So, rest does not happen because we deserve it. It does not arrive as a reward for good behavior, productivity, or endurance. It happens, or doesn't, because of how our lives are built. This is not theoretical for me. As a spoonie, as someone living in a chronically ill body, my body requires more rest than what our culture considers normal. That has always been true, whether or not the people around me were willing to acknowledge it. And for an incredibly long time, they were not. Instead, you know what I got? I got told to just push through. You can rest later. Now is not a good time. Once we're done, right? And then after everything else. So, I did what I was told. I pushed through again and again and again. And by doing so, I ignored those early signals, the quiet requests for breath, for rest, and those gentle warnings. Because every time I tried to listen to my body, I was told it was inconvenient. The house needed to be cleaned, or the kids needed to be fed or bathed, or they needed help with homework. The dogs need to go for a walk. Dinner needs to be cooked. There was always something more important than my body. And when I finally collapsed, when my body finally forced me to stop and rest, the narrative suddenly flipped. Well, why didn't you pace yourself? Why did you push so hard if you knew this was going to happen? Why didn't you rest when your body first asked for it? And the answer was simple, infuriating, and deeply clarifying. Because when I tried to rest, I was told it wasn't the right time. Rest was conditional and postponed, and it was framed as irresponsible unless everything else was done first. And the most cruel irony of it, the only time I was ever allowed to do stuff for me was late at night after everybody else was asleep. So I stayed up too late, not because I was careless, but because that was the only space my life allowed for selfhood. And then I was blamed for that too. There's no fucking winning. And this is why rest cannot be a moral issue. This is why rest must be structural. If rest only comes after everything else is done, then rest is never going to come. Especially for caregivers, chronically ill people, disabled folks, parents, and anybody whose labor is assumed rather than acknowledged. Wives, mothers. HearthFire asks us to build lives that can actually hold rest. Not as a luxury or an apology, but as a foundational element. Now that means realistic expectations. Not expectations shaped by people with different bodies. Not expectations built for endless output, but expectations grounded in what this body can sustainably give. It means boundaries around time and energy, not because we are selfish, but because without them, rest has nowhere to land. It means systems that reduce decision fatigue, because when you're already exhausted, having to argue with yourself about whether you're allowed to stop or not is another form of harm. And it means permission to pause without explanation, because when rest requires justification, it is never safe. And here's the truth I had to learn the very hard way, because, I only learn things the hard way. If rest collapses your life, then the structure was never supportive. That, my darling, is not a personal failure on your part. Once again, it is information. Everything is information, my friends. Information about where your life depends on you overriding your body. Information about where care has been replaced as expectation. And information about where devotion has been confused with endurance. Part of my healing, this is my personal journey, part of my healing and part of my yoga has been learning to listen before collapse. I'm still not perfect at it either. Refer back to, missing a daily draw last week. In yoga philosophy, the very first limb is not breath or posture or even discipline. It's the yamas. And the very first of those is Ahimsa, non-harming. And that means not harming others and, more importantly, not harming yourself. Ahimsa asks me to stop treating my body as an obstacle. It asks me to believe my body when it speaks the first time. It asks me to rest before I am forced to. And that has required changing the structure of my life, not just my mindset. I have had to rearrange so much of my life for this. Because HearthFire devotion doesn't ask us to survive on fumes. It asks us to build lives that can hold us, even when we stop, pause, and rest. Rest that is built into the structure is not indulgence, it's care. It is non-harm. It is devotion that does not demand our destruction as proof of sincerity. And for bodies like mine, and for lives like so many of you listening, that kind of devotion isn't optional. It is the only way we last. Hey, it's a Mike. And a Hazel. Oh, thank you, Pratham. I'm glad that you find me helpful. IE, by the way, on Spoonie, babe. I'm sorry you had a rough start to your day, hon. It's okay. You're not the one who usually types Spoonie, so it's not in your autocorrupt. I genuinely have had to, especially in the last 10 years, as my health has deteriorated, I have had to reevaluate my entire existence, because as I started entering perimenopause, my body decided to say, hey, the fiber is going to get worse. The chronic fatigue is going to get a lot worse. And oh, by the way, the quality of your sleep is going to suck for a while. And then throw in the fact that perimenopause fucks with a woman's ADHD, and it can make the autism more annoying. Oh, shit. Sorry. Apparently, I'm not supposed to drop the F-bomb with the rating he chose. But the menopause and stuff wreaks havoc with the neurodivergence, makes everything worse. And so, for example, I have not gotten to bed more than maybe 3 times since Halloween on time. So, that is where we're at here. Okay. Yep, as John says, makes perfect sense. All right, now, moving on, my loves. Oh, my fingers are cold. So, this week, we have been working with Vairagya. I should not roll that R. Okay. So, this week, we have been working with Vairagya. Non-attachment. It is often translated as detachment, and for a lot of people, that word lands wrong, which is why I originally said non-attachment. It can sound cold or withdrawn, like you're supposed to stop caring, stop feeling, and just stop engaging with the world altogether. Not what Vairagya asks. At its core, it is discernment. Clear-eyed, grounded choice. It asks a deceptively simple question, too. What am I clinging to that drains me? It doesn't ask, what am I avoiding? Or what am I failing at? Or what should I be doing better? It asks, what am I continuing to hold out of habit, fear, guilt, obligation, or expectation that quietly consumes my energy? Why am I envisioning a toaster plugged into the wall? Anyway, It doesn't mean disengaging from life. It means disengaging from what consumes you. There is a profound difference there. You can be deeply engaged, loving, committed, and present while also choosing to not feed things that harm you. Vairagya isn't about withdrawal. It's about refusal. Refusing to give your limited life force to patterns that do not sustain you. Now, in daily practice, it often looks unglamorous. It's not a big declaration. It's not a dramatic letting go ceremony. It's a series of small, quiet choices made again and again and again. It's choosing not to feed urgency. Urgency tells us everything is critical, everything is now, everything is going to fall apart if we slow down. You got to keep going. Vairagya asks us to question that voice. Is this truly urgent, or is it a familiar pressure masquerading as importance? When urgency is constant, it becomes a form of extraction. Letting go of urgency doesn't mean becoming careless. It means refusing to live in perpetual alarm. It's choosing not to feed comparison. Comparison drains us by convincing us that we are always behind, always lacking, and always doing it wrong. It turns other people's paths into measuring sticks for our own worth. Vairagya invites us to step out of that cycle, not because others don't matter, but because your practice cannot grow in borrowed timelines. It's choosing not to feed perfectionism. Perfectionism disguises itself as dedication, but it thrives on fear. Fear of being seen as inadequate, fear of rest, fear of stopping. Vairagya loosens perfectionism's grip by asking, what would still matter if this didn't have to be flawless? What would remain if good enough were truly allowed? It's choosing not to feed practices that punish inconsistency. This one is especially important because any practice that withdraws care, belonging, or access when you falter is not teaching devotion, it's teaching compliance. Vairagya gives you permission to step back from systems that equate worth with performance. Letting go of a rigid practice doesn't mean you failed it. It very possibly means it failed you. And yes, Vairagya is choosing not to feed the belief that exhaustion proves commitment. This belief runs deep. We are taught culturally, spiritually, and socially that if something matters, it should hurt. That sacrifice is the price of sincerity, and that rest has to be justified, earned, or delayed. Vairagya says no. Exhaustion does not prove devotion. It proves depletion. Commitment that destroys your capacity to care is not noble. Let me say that one again, because I want the people in the back to hear this. Commitment that destroys your capacity to care is not noble. It is unsustainable. Vairagya asks you to release the idea that suffering is the only valid evidence of love, and here's the part that often brings grief and relief at the same time. Letting go doesn't mean you didn't care. It means you care enough to protect what matters. You don't loosen your grip because something was meaningless. You loosen your grip because it costs too much for what it was giving back. Because holding it requires abandoning yourself. Because continuing would mean feeding harm quietly, daily, and indefinitely. Vairagya honors the truth that care has limits. Your time is finite, your energy is finite, and your freaking nervous system is finite. Discernment is how you decide where those resources go. And this is not a one-time decision, by the way. Vairagya is a daily practice, sometimes hourly, sometimes moment by moment. It asks you to keep noticing what is draining me today, what no longer deserves my automatic yes. Some days it looks like just stepping back. Some days you're doing less. And some days it looks like staying, but in a gentler way. It doesn't demand purity or withdrawal or that you detach from everything you love. It simply asks you to stop feeding what is eating you alive. And paired with HearthFire, Vairagya becomes protective instead of austere. It helps you choose practices, relationships, rhythms, and expectations that you can actually live with, not just survive through. This is how devotion becomes sustainable, not by gripping tighter, but by discerning wisely. Vairagya is not the absence of care, it is care refined. Care that knows when to stay, when to loosen, and that chooses preservation over depletion. And in a world that constantly asks you to give more than you have, that kind of discernment is not disengagement. It's an act of profound devotion. As we close tonight, I want to leave y'all with this. You are not required to burn brightly every day. You are allowed to glow low. You are allowed to tend instead of consume. Devotion that lasts is devotion that adapts. Care that sustains you is not selfish. It is intelligent, it's wise, and how you stay. So, take one more breath with me, not to fix anything or achieve anything, just to arrive. Carry this with you into your pacing, choices, and your rest. Remember that a hearth fire doesn't shout, doesn't demand attention. It warms the entire house quietly, steadily, faithfully, simply by being tended. And as you go back out into the world, let me remind you of something that always matters and what I live by. Spread love. Spread joy, and spread kindness. There is already enough darkness and hate out there. We do not need to add to it. Instead, let us choose again and again to be beacons of light and hope for those who are stumbling in the dark, unsure of their footing and unsure of their worth. Tell your loved ones what they mean to you. Tell them loudly and tell them often. And tell them in all their forms, 2 legs, 4 legs, wings, fur, paws, or claws, that you do love them beyond all measure. Time passes far more quickly than any of us want to acknowledge, and the opportunities to say, I love you, are not promised. Now, if you take only one thing away from everything I do here, please let it be this. You are loved. You are wanted. You are needed. And there is a reason you are here, even if you don't know what it is yet. I didn't find mine until I was 45. So, if you are still searching, still becoming, and still figuring it all out, you are not behind. You are exactly where you need to be. Thank you, guys. Thank you for being here, for tending your flame instead of burning yourselves out. I love you guys to bits. You are the reason I am here every day. Namaste, my witchlings.